set? Everyone all set? Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the annual Capital Planning Summit for the town of Fairfield. I'm going to ask our clerk, Ms. Bossi, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Welcome, everyone. We have one item on our agenda tonight, and this is to review and discuss the capital plan and debt service bonding requirements and projected debt service funding for the next several years for the town and the Board of Education. Now, this was a meeting that we started to hold as a Board of Finance about 3 or 4 years ago. I can't recall exactly the time frame. This might be the third one.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I think that you helped develop this, and I'm going to say 4 to 5 years ago, actually.
I don't know. It might have been, but thank you. But the whole idea of this was to get representatives from the 4 bodies that really approve funding in the town budget cycle, as well as the bodies that generate the actual requests for capital and bonded projects together so that we could have a context for which to understand when items come before us through the course of the next fiscal year, what they do to our bonding, what they do to our funding, what they do to our budgets, what they do to the town's financial position. So this came about 3, 4, 5 years ago in order to get all those bodies on the same page. So with that in mind, we have Mr. Tetro here tonight representing the Board of Selectmen. We have Dr. Title and Mr. Dwyer here representing the Board of Education. We have Mr. McCarthy and Ms. Marmion, I can never say your name appropriately, representing the RTM, and we welcome you to our table. This is it's meant to be a discussion, so we'll dispense with formalities. Mr. Mayor will walk us through a number of schedules that he and the administration and the team have put together, and we thank them for those efforts. And we will ask questions during the course of that presentation to get a better understanding of where the town is heading. The goal of tonight is not to review individual capital projects. Those get reviewed as they come before our bodies over the course of the next several years. But it is, as I said earlier, to provide a context for when we're reviewing those projects individually, we'll understand how they fit into the greater financial picture of the town. Mr. Tetro, did you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to expand on that a bit. I think, Tom, to your credit, regardless of when you did it, you worked to put together the original waterfall chart. And it started at a point in time where we were getting capital plans coming before the Board of Finance when you, myself, Ms. LeClaire, Mr. Mayor were sitting here, and we weren't always getting a complete capital plan at any point. And part of the focus of this workshop is say, let's sit down, let's get all the projects on the table, and let's make it a discussion. Let's kind of see how everything flows together. It took several years, but one of the things Mr. Mayor's been able to do with his team in finance in the past year is finally get, I think, I'm going to say to what your vision originally was when you put this together. But for the first time starting in February, about, what's that, 6, 7 months ago, we finally have a waterfall chart that we've been looking at that ties back to the detail. For the first time, the numbers in the waterfall chart relate back to the detail capital projects, which is what I think the goal was all along, if I can put words in your mouth. We didn't ever have the backup or that tie all the way through. We now do, not only through the major capital projects, but all the way down to the non-recurring projects that we call. So when we look at that, this now becomes something that we can work with, have a discussion about, and see that it ties out to the annual debt service projections in this. And as Tom said, that doesn't mean that any one of these numbers has been approved. There are a few in here that have. I don't mean to say none of them have, but certainly the ones that are further out haven't been approved. There aren't necessarily detailed backup estimates or support for each of the estimates, but they are our best guess at this point at what something 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 years down the road may cost, so we can keep it on there. As we've learned in the past year, there are surprises. We didn't anticipate, as we sat here 12, 14 months ago, PCBs would jump on the scene. We didn't anticipate Storm Sandy 14 months ago in terms of, so we know that certain things are going to change as we go through this. But I think this becomes a dynamic document and a working document. So for the first time, as we saw during the Riverfield discussion and the Ludlow discussion, this will come with every capital project. We can see the impact of any new projects, and frankly, most are on here, so we're really looking at, in this case, adjustments. As we saw with Riverfield, it wasn't that it wasn't on here, but we did have to make an adjustment for what the building committee came back to us with. We had Osborne Hill windows on here, but we did have to make an adjustment for what those came back on here, which is a much more comfortable position, so we know what the project is. We're finalizing the numbers. We can see what the impact is through here. So this becomes a much more useful tool and something I think that's an important part of our financial planning process from here.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra. Does anybody else, before I turn it over to Mr. Mayor to walk us through, does anybody else have anything to add or say? Any of our friends or colleagues from other boards? Seeing none, Mr. Mayor, the floor is yours. Thank you.
The only thing I'd like to add to those comments are, I'd like to build on one of Mr. Flynn's comments. This is indeed an information and discussion session, not a decision-making session. And two, the one thing he said that is not required, that's questions. They are allowed, but not required. What I'd like to do is start with well, first, I'd like to acknowledge Lisa, whose last name I don't know, at the Board of Ed, and Tom Cullen at the Board of Ed, who played an instrumental role in helping and putting together the design, the format for all of this. And Lisa does an amazing amount of great work over there.
Mr. Mayor, please bring the microphone a little closer. It's not picking you up.
How's that?
Better.
Good. Thank you. Secondly, I'd like to just build it from the ground up. The source of the information is, on the town side, is department heads. The town gets together, holds a meeting. Okay, let's talk about what we need going forward. You know, by departments, I mean the police, the fire, Parks and Rec, DPW, be the primary departments that have input there. IT, of course, and then on the Board of Ed side, the same activity takes place with Dr. Title and his staff. Now, there is, every couple of years or so, the Board of Ed actually votes on a capital plan. I don't know when the last capital plan was voted on by the Board of Ed. And as Mr. Tetra pointed out, many of these projects have not been approved. They've not been fully vetted. They have been, but they are offered and they're presented here as what people are thinking about. The Board of Ed puts together a very beautiful, I'll borrow one of these because I don't have a beautiful one, color chart. And the color chart has the top and the bottom. And across the chart are years. And the top of the chart is listed projects. And the year is the likely year, given current thinking, that project will come before the town bodies for approval, for appropriation approval. And then the bottom of the chart shows, if approved in that year, the bottom of the chart indicates the years in which the dollars will be spent. And for example, if you look at the far left column on the first page of the public schools facilities capital plan chart, you can see in yellow Sherman School addition and renovations, 2011-12. $2 million of that was anticipated to be spent in 11-12 and $1 million in 12-13. So the funds can go out for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or they could be expended in that same year. So we have the same form, not in color, not as pretty, that is for the town. And the town has the non-recurring and capital projects. Same thing, top, when it's going to be approved, bottom, when it will be expended. Now, what happens now, just like on the on the Board of Ed side, there's internal meetings, discussions, it makes sense. Same thing on the town side. There'll be internal meetings, we'll run some simulations, we'll look at what it does to the debt service schedule, trying to manage that within the administration's guidelines to have minimal tax impact while still being able to satisfy the needs, the capital needs of the town. And so after a few simulations, come to a final conclusion, things will be moved around, among years, moved back, moved out, whatever. From those two documents, then, we develop a single-page landscape document that's called the Projected Cash Flow for Capital and Non-Recurring Projects, Town and Board of Education. As I guess it's been pretty much since I've been in the CFO chair, every time we have a presentation here, there's some tweaking, some hopefully improvement to the documents. These documents go out this year, go out 10 years, whereas the last time we did this, they went out 8 years. So you have from the current fiscal year 13-14 through fiscal year ending 2023. The top is the Board of Ed, in the middle is the town, the bottom third is the total of the town and the Board of Ed. You can see it has the total of the capital projects, less reimbursements anticipated, because what this form is used for is then to generate what is the actual waterfall schedule. So you have when items are going to be appropriated, you have when the money is going to be spent, and then you use that expenditures minus capital reimbursements that are going to be received to determine what your cash flow requirements will be. And then those cash flow requirements are formulated in this chart. One of the things you have to be careful about, since some of these projects are multiple year projects, you want to make sure you don't end up double bonding something, which is one of the things that happened this year, why we didn't get the information out on Friday, didn't get out till today, and I apologize to the body for that. So then we have the actual waterfall that Phoenix Advisors has the software package that puts this together. That's the, I don't know, 8.5 by 15 or whatever it is. It's got lots of little numbers on it. It basically goes by fiscal year, shows what the principal and interest payments will be on the debt outstanding for that fiscal year. Includes obviously town general obligation bonds, bands, clean water project, and new bonds. One of the changes, we have increased the interest
Rate?
assumption. Thank you. Interest rate assumptions now goes from 3.5 to 4.0 over the period 2014 through 2022. It still shows us bonding every other year. We may, there's some thought being given to bonding every year. It used to be that bonding expense was considerable relative to the bonds, but having done a little bit of analysis, we could probably bond every year without any extra expense, and it would allow us to manage the process a little bit more smoothly. But that's a discussion item, and something we're looking at. No decisions been made on that, and it hasn't been fully discussed. Then what we do is we take the information, and it's then formatted on the schedule that's called Town of Fairfield Comparison of Debt Services Projections, Landscape 8.5 by 11. And the top part of the schedule being the most relevant, which shows fiscal year ending 6/30/14 through 6/30/23, what the debt service will be given what we call the full request schedule. That's as opposed to some of the other simulated schedules. It's probably not the best title, but it's the one that we picked last year, and we've stuck with it. You notice you have 3 of these documents. The reason you have 3 is because the last capital planning meeting, this meeting was held in February, but in May, there was some capital projects that went before the various town bodies and were approved. Primary one, if I remember, was Riverfield School. So since people had seen that one and we put these documents together for that activity and for those votes, I thought people might be interested in seeing the comparison between May 15 capital planning documents and today's. But if the top one is what I call the more relevant one, it's the original capital plan from February through today. Now, then the final document.
Mr. Mayor,
sir.
if you might for a second.
No, not at all. Go ahead.
Thank you. So a couple things. Number one, we held this meeting in February this year because it was delayed due to all the storms and all the damage, and we didn't have information on PCBs at the time last year. At this time, we didn't have information on, or we didn't have solid information. We had the storm hit us, so this continued to get delayed until such time as last year's, though it was planned in September, we didn't hold it in February.
Specifically, it had been scheduled to the day after Storm
Right.
Sandy hitting, and that was October 30th. So when we met in November, we then had better information on PCBs. We didn't have any information on the Storm
Right.
Sandy, but we knew that would be. So we delayed it till late January at
Right.
that point, and early February was the first date that was
It was
compatible.
originally scheduled for September.
Correct.
We pushed it to October. We had the storm, and then we pushed it to February, so we held it in February. Then, I think you had to your point, in May, after all the larger projects had been approved, you had better available information in terms on the estimates of those projects, and so this is adjusted for that, correct?
If I might, let me
Yeah.
tweak what you just said. It wasn't after the other projects were approved. As part of the approval process
Right.
for Riverfield and for Ludlow, we brought these charts along. Because
Yeah.
one of the questions is, if we vote yes on this, what does that do?
Yep.
So that's where, when I talked earlier about this being now a dynamic part of our approval process, every time there's a major capital project coming through, we'll have an update of this chart. So it won't be just a once a year. It's not a static chart. We don't do this and, hey, let's look at it next year and see how close we came. We're
Right.
using this as we go through. So that's the value of this from an ongoing standpoint.
Right.
And from an RTM standpoint, that helps you see what's taken place. It helps the Board of Finance see, it helps the Board of Selectmen see what the impact
Right.
is as we go through.
So the May are the updated numbers for better information that we did review when we looked at those projects back in May, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Right,
Thank
yeah,
you.
Thank you for all the clarifications. Now, the next page, the penultimate document, another landscape that's titled Capital Planning Workshop, Significant Changes to Capital Plan. And I'm open to suggestions on improvement to this, but this is the first time we've put this document together. Basically, it uses last year's, not last year, actually, it's this year's, but last fiscal year's capital plan, February 13, as the base. And then it gives us May of 13 and shows us what the numbers were then. As you can see, there's the first change that was when we first extended it out to 2023. One, a year had gone by, plus, or at least the concept of the year had gone by. And two, we wanted to extend out for a 10-year period. And then it shows you basically what the changes were that had the impact on the plan. If you go to the comparison of debt service projections, if yours are in the same order as mine, it would be the second page, February 13 through May of 13. You will see that the 10-year activity, based upon these changes, and I'll just go over them very briefly because you all have it in front of you. There was, again, we expanded it out to 10 years, and we moved some projects ahead, including the Ludlow High School bathrooms, the White Elementary School work, Sherman School work, some Holland Hill, Tomlinson, Mill Hill, and Jennings School work. We moved forward, back, closer to us, Ludlow High School roof. And then we had some adjustments to the Ludlow High School capital plan where there was an increase in the architect estimate of about $170,000, an increase in the windows of $450,000, and a decrease in some renovation changes of $970,000. The bathroom was taken out of the capital plan and put in non-reoccurring, and then we had an increase in the roof project. And when we got done with all of that moving around, as you can see from this page, if you go to the top, the first subtotal, we had a reduction in the 10-year debt service of $4,757,000. Okay.
Where are you getting that number?
The February 13 versus May 13 capital plan. Okay,
That's
then if you
not
go,
on- Right, that's not on one page, that's on the separate.
that's on, you have 3 pages that look like
Yep.
this?
Yeah, I got it. Okay, thanks. Yep,
Okay,
4.7, 4.8.
right. Okay, and then, so, then the third column on this page, we're documenting, we're looking at this significant changes sheet, schedule, is what transpired from May 13 through September 13. And again, there was some rescheduling of projects, including the golf course clubhouse renovation. The phone consultant was a minor issue, but that was moved forward. There were some changes in the land, Parks and Rec lighting, a fire truck. There was various non-recurring projects. You can go to the schedules, they're all listed in detail there. There were increased, there was not increased, there was projects added as we got closer to the 14-15 capital year, fiscal year, and people started thinking more about what they wanted, needed, thought they wanted, think they will need. And of course, Storm Sandy was the expenditures of those was spread out over a more realistic expenditure timeline than we had. And then there was an additional $8 million in DPW work that was added to the chart. And additionally, the actual bans issued increased by $3 million. The bans in the May plan were estimated to be at $17.5 million. The actual issuance was $20,266,000. So if you go to the page that says comparison of debt service May to September, you see that if you look at that same subtotal page, the 10-year difference is a plus $3,389,477. And then if you go to what I think is the top page, which is the February 13th through September, which is the full timeline, you can see that the combination of all the changes, obviously one of the impacts here was the interest rate increases, and I have not quantified that, not major, but certainly a part of it. So the total of it all is a decrease of $1,367,503 over the 10-year period, with not until you get into year 2023, which is 800,000 of that. So it's kind of insignificant each year. And then the ultimate page, which is the page that's titled Debt Service as a Percent of Budget. This page is put together because the Moody's, Standard & Poor, Fitch, obviously the debt service burden of a town is a significant factor in the rating process of a town. And the current debt service payment budgeted for this year, which will not change, divided by the approved budget for this year is 8.23%. Okay, so then what you have on the right-hand side, series of percentages there, debt service percent of budget, which shows with increases in the budget of 1.5%, 2%, or 2.5%, given the updated capital plan based upon the waterfall and the waterfall information. You can see what happens to our debt service as a percentage of budget. And 10% is considered moderate. And as you can see, we are under 10%, even with the smaller 1.5% increases in the budget. Obviously, the higher the budget goes up, the better that percentage shows, because your denominator is a larger number compared to the numerator. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And the purpose of these, again, is for people to get a sense of what it looks like, for people to look at what people are thinking about going forward, so people can, so the town bodies can think about this in their budget deliberation and in their authorization for specific project deliberations. And so it will be used as a tool. It is in itself, it is only a tool, it is not a final document.
Mr. Mayor.
And Tom, just to clarify,
Yeah.
looking at that last sheet that Bob went over, debt service percent of budget, we outlined 3 different kind of budget rates or growth rates there just to provide a range. Those are not projections, and that is not part of a financial plan or projection. We did, as Bob pointed out, these are numbers that are on the low side. So if the budget went up more than that, that would actually make the debt service as a percent of the budget less, assuming the debt service wasn't the driver that made it go up more than that. So in essence, this is, worst case is too strong a word, but this is a conservative way to look at that in terms of what our debt service would be as a percentage of the operating budget.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra.
No.
I want to ask a question.
I was just going to make one more comment, which to kind of sum it wrap up with. When we look at these numbers, even though we're showing 10 years, the first 3 years are solid. Those aren't going to change unless something drastic happens. 4 years pretty solid too. After you got over 5 years, there's going to be other projects. But I think you can look at the first 3 to 5 years as fairly solid debt service numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to turn to our friends from the Board of Education and the Education Administration. When's the last time you looked at your capital plan? How solid are, I'm not going to talk about the numbers, how solid are the projects here in the prioritization of the projects from your board and from the Education Administration's priorities?
Closer to the case. The projects come directly from the long-range facilities plan that the board last approved in April of 2011. And so the projects have essentially remained the same. Occasionally, we adjust the numbers based on new information. I'm going to say that last spring, we had intended to approve an updated plan, but as you may remember in our conversation, that just as Superstorm Sandy and Nemo and the Ludlow roof impacted the town's staff, it also impacted our staff. That, together with the Riverfield and the Ludlow project, had not yet been approved, that we were awaiting the Wooded report on PCBs and its potential impact in all of our buildings, and finally we're awaiting the security report from our police chief. On September 24th, we'll receive the Woodard report, and I would invite anybody here to be part of that meeting. It costs us whenever we bring a consultant out to a public meeting, and so the more people who show up at the Board of Ed meeting on September 24th, it might get your questions answered. And so the two issues that are probably outstanding that are not factored in here are those two outstanding reports, the PCV report and the security report. But the balance of the numbers, our board has confidence that the projects are still needed, that the numbers are realistic, and we remain committed, as we did state last spring, that we know what the town's goal is relative to keeping debt service within a certain percentage. And therefore, while we may move projects around, the goal will be to stay within the confines of the annual allocation so that we work with the town to accomplish that same goal. So we're comfortable with the numbers at the moment.
Question, Mr. Dwyer, thank you for the answer. So on this schedule, I'm going to refer to the schedule that Mr. Mayor put in front of us that looks at the, he's titled it the Capital Planning Workshop, Significant Changes to Capital Plans as of this month. There's, if you look under May to February, there's a fair number of projects that have quote-unquote been rescheduled. So Fairfield, Ludlow, Dwight, Sherman, Holland Hill, Tomlinson, Mill Hill, and Jennings are all listed. And I just want to make sure that this isn't a gotcha question. This isn't, have this gone before your board? Have they agreed?
The waterfall chart, as it was updated last spring, that showed some of these changes
Yeah.
to accommodate the Ludlow and Riverfield project, have been presented to our board. We felt it was not appropriate to try and vote those
Okay.
changes at the time, knowing full well that the long-range facilities plan will get readjusted. This is a dynamic document, and so our board is aware of these shifts, and so it won't be a surprise to them to see this chart or this piece of paper.
Great. When is, and I know this, if it doesn't come from me, it'll come from someone else here, when do you expect to have the next iteration of your long-range facilities plan?
On our calendar of
Yeah.
board meetings, we're expecting that the updated long-range facilities plan will be presented sometime in March, and then will get discussed over 2 or 3 months and approved, let's say, April or May. So that is what is on our schedule, and we assume that we'll have we know that we're getting the PCB report on September 24th, and so that will leave the only outstanding report being the security report, which I have no doubt that Chief McNamara will be getting it to us at some point so that we can factor that in.
Okay. Dr. Tuttle.
Yeah, just one further point
Thank you, Mr. Dwyer.
is that we also felt that it was time for us to update our 10-year enrollment projections. We did those last in December of 2010. Enrollment projections are included in our long-range facilities plan, and it's something that obviously people want to know. There were questions about the enrollment projections this past spring. We've been doing annual one-year updates, but we haven't done a full 10-year update, and so we're working on getting that done as well. So we want to get that piece of information in, because if the board does want to adjust any of these projects out there, they'll want to do it based on the most current and accurate enrollment forecasts.
And when is that due, Dr. Tuttle? When is that enrollment?
I'm expecting that we'll have that done by the end of the calendar year. So by December 31st, we should have that in place, but
So that'll be factored into both the
exactly.
long-range plan?
That's another reason why we won't get the long-range plan to the board till February, March. We want to get the enrollment projections in and the other two items that Phil talked about.
And as well as that'll inform some of your decisions, I would guess, on your operating budget as well.
Well, the operating budget year to year is, we get the one-year projection right away, because we need that immediately. So we asked the consultant to give us just a one-year update, the most important number being the projected kindergarten enrollment. One-year update, we get that. usually by about October 15th, right after the October 1 numbers. They can turn that around pretty quickly. But to do a 10-year projection update is considerably more work. We actually want them to come into the town. We want them to go to the building department. I've talked to Mr. Tetro about this. We want them to look at permits. We want them to look at projects that are in the works and how that might impact us. So that's a bigger project than just a one-year enrollment update. So for our operating budget, the 1 year will work. But for this longer-term planning, we want a better longer-term forecast. Or up-to-date one.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tetra?
I just, again, looking at this as a tool,
Right.
I think that the Board of Ed and administration is starting to also get more comfortable with this as we step through this. If you look at the changes, say, between February and May, we had, again, the PCB project came on. Then we saw Ludlow get, the Ludlow Windows project got kind of totally redefined and became renovations, windows, and roof. We saw Riverfield go from the 10 million-ish number we had in to about 14 million. And then we saw these other projects get moved out. So I can't think of a better example of how this has kind of helped us in our capital planning and our managing our debt service. And I think the Board of Ed and administration took advantage of that in kind of looking at that and helping the town, if you will, manage our ongoing debt service ahead. So I think that's something that we wouldn't have had, as much as we might have moved some of the pieces, we wouldn't have had that kind of window of opportunity on the impact of the changes in the past.
Thank you. It does lead to another question I have, but I want to be cognizant. I don't want to hog this. So do others have questions at this point? All right, so I am going to hog it for a minute. If you go back to Mr. Mayor's schedule here, the changes, I want to make sure I'm reading it right. So it's labeled the significant changes to capital plans is the top of it. So these are actual capital plans, and I guess, are these from, and maybe I have this wrong, okay, 2013, right? The first column is 89 million, right, net, or it comes to 115 or 116 million before reimbursement, right? The September 2013 column, right, totals 122 million before reimbursement, right, of capital plans. Now, on the face of it, when I first read it, you know, be careful what you look for. That looks like in 7 months, our estimated capital spending over this period of time went up by $7 to $8 million, or 7 to 8%. But it looks as though that's apples to oranges, because the first column is 8 years, and the last column is 10 years. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Can we get, just for my own sanity's sake and not tonight, but can we get 8 years to 8 years so that we can see what the difference is? See, part of what I'm trying to get here is that we're consistent, not that we're just tracking it and saying, oh yeah, by the way, we're up $8 million or $7 million. I want to know that we're, you know, living within or even lower. And this was disconcerting just because it's not labeled. I didn't catch the labeling.
I think that's a good question and kind of a reasonable perspective comparison. But one of the other comparison pieces, and very important one, is when you track it back to the waterfall chart itself.
Yeah,
And see what happens with the annual debt service.
absolutely.
Because that gives you the year-by-year change that you're looking at. So what you identified is one perspective on that, but tying it back to the annual debt service, I think, helps track that as we go through this.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to do is that, you're absolutely correct, but that waterfall takes into consideration things such as your interest rate, such as your payment schedule, such as when it's going to be bonded, where these actually, what I was doing actually takes just into consideration what we've actually approved or are going to be expected to approve. So it's something that's actually, quite frankly, a little bit more controllable than, you know, once you've gone out and you start the bonding process. And that's why I was trying to focus on that, but your point's very well taken. The other thing is not readily apparent here, Mr. Mayor, and this is a lot of good work, is what's what's our debt level going to be? So what's happening to our actual outstanding debt through the course of these years? So we know what's going on with our debt service in that we're keeping it under that quote-unquote threshold of 10%. Quite frankly, we're not making a ton of headway there. We're kind of, as I read these, I basically read it as hey, everything else being equal, we're kind of the status quo. We're in that 8 to 7% every year. We're at around $27 million of debt service every year, give or take, timing, which is going to change, right? What I didn't get was, gee, where's our debt level actually going to be?
That would be a very excellent schedule to add to this presentation for next time. Yeah, and I'll produce one and send it out when I get back from Turkey.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And also, regarding your first question, though,
Yeah,
you can go to...
yeah, please, tell me where to go. I've been told where to go many times.
Love you, Nima. You can go to the projected cash flow schedule that goes out to 10 years,
Yeah,
and you can see the amounts that have been added by year. And you can also go, like, in other words, there's $6.5 million added on capital projects, and $800,000 added on the last 2 years. So there's $7 million of that.
you're on this schedule, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but what
And
this,
then if you can go, and then if you go back to the detail, the Board of Ed and the town capital schedules, you could actually see what those projects are that are the new projects.
yeah, but this is actually cash flow, this isn't projects approved. I was actually thinking more of projects approved.
Yeah, and a lot of this is not projects approved. It's all
Yeah.
projects
See, I'm trying to get
to be
to,
approved. That's one of the runs that we do, but it's like, okay, well, if we didn't approve anything, what would happen? But we know we're going to approve stuff.
no, but what I'm trying to figure out is in this, so in February we had this, and now we're having this now, right? So what did the February discussion assume we were going to approve over the next 5 to 10 years? What does the September discussion assume we're going to approve over the next 5 or 10 years? That's kind of what I'm trying to get to.
You mean improve?
Approve, meaning,
Oh, approved.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's right, and that's the top part of the schedules, which shows the
But
approval.
it doesn't compare February to,
You'd have to compare the two schedules. But I do have a copy that I would of May's and February's.
I just want it in
give
aggregate.
to
I don't
you.
need to know by project.
Yeah.
Just in aggregate. What did we say in February we were going to approve every year over the next 5 to 10 years? And what are we now saying in September is approvable over the next 5 or 10?
You got it. Yeah, that's easy to do.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Thank you very much. Mrs. Leclerc, you had your hand up.
I think part of the answer to Tom's question is just on different sheets, and I just
Maybe.
want to clarify with Bob, is if I look at the one that has the changes,
Yep.
if I look in the third column, that's your final numbers, which is on the sheet that compares the May to September, and that total number ties out to the bottom of the September 17, 2013. But then if you look at these two columns, they have different year timeframes.
Exactly.
But if you look at the ones on each of these two sheets, they're the ones for the full time period that are comparing your apples.
But, okay, are
So that's
these,
going from 14 to 2023.
okay, show it to me again.
So if you look at the bottom of the one that has February,
Right.
that started out at, the bottom line says 85 million.
Oh,
And then
73.
for May 15th, it goes to 86.
Yep.
I think those are the two that you want to compare to
Right, and if that's
the last column.
right, and if that's the case, that's what's scaring me.
Is that
And it
correct,
d-
Bob? Is that?
And it doesn't tie to actually this schedule. Because if you look at this schedule,
Excuse me, can I ask Mrs. Leclerc again to
Okay.
cite the
There's a
pages?
sheet.
I've gone through and letter and numbered all these pages so I can keep them in
Okay.
some order, so it, but are you talking about 86,199 or,
Yes. I think
and you're comparing that one to,
to what the total now today is on September 2013. So that's where we were at the end of May, and, right? Is that correct, Bob? Is that,
because that'd actually make it worse, because that'd say that spending or projects are estimated to have gone up $13 million from February through September. It can't
Well,
be...
in part, Riverfield was higher than was in the February plan.
Sure.
Ludlow was,
But I thought that
in
things were
total
pushed
shouldn't have
out.
been higher.
Right, because as we did
But we did bring
those-
more of it in.
Right. The dates would be different, but within the 10-year period,
Well, Riverfield and Ludlow would both be within the 10-year period.
right. but we
Riverfield
were
just
pushing-
increased.
But we were pushing things out the back end, I thought.
I'm not sure how much we pushed them out the back end, but perhaps the simplest thing is just get you the chart that you asked for originally.
Yeah.
So that we don't have to mix and match
Yeah.
numbers.
And one of the things on this, just that is confusing on it, and thank you, Mrs. Leclerc, for bringing that to our attention. If you do look at the February 2013 number on this report, Bob, where it's supposed to represent 8 years, and the total is $89 million. If you look on the other schedule that Mrs. Leclerc referred to, the February 7th number that is supposed to be 10 years is actually $85 million. So we're actually spending less in 10 years than this schedule says we were spending in 8 years. So,
I didn't follow that. I'm not sure which your second schedule was, but
I can show it to you. It's
Right.
basically at the bottom of this
I like
schedule.
Mrs. Albin's idea about numbering the pages in the future.
In the bottom of this schedule, where you have the February, right?
Bottom of the... Got it?
Okay. You look at that, the number comes to 85,007,083.
Correct.
Yeah. If you look at your Picasso here, right, which is, compares to 3 up the top, the number that's supposed to represent 8 years' worth of capital projects, which is the February 2013 number, that is 89 million. So what this would suggest is that over 8 years, we're spending 89 million in new capital projects. And over 10 years, we're spending 85 million. So there's a inconsistency there. So it's just something to follow back
Yeah.
up on.
I think what happened in the change, we probably didn't make, when we made the changes, the bottom line might not have got changed. Check that.
But anyway, what I'm trying to get to is, you know, what does it assume over the next few years we're going to be approving for capital projects? And how is that different from what that assumption was in February? To make sure that, as Mr. Dwyer now goes forward and works with his board to put together their plan, their long-range facilities plan, what are they, what's that guidepost that you're looking for, you know? So, thank you. And Mrs. Leclerc, thank you for
Yeah.
highlighting that.
Yeah, the September numbers cross-reference, but the February numbers do not.
Yeah, right. Right. So, any other questions right now on the schedules before us? Mr. McCarthy?
Just so I'm following along. The original project plan, with the pretty colors. Is that current, or was that how the projects were originally envisioned back in February?
That's current.
Okay, so, all right, then they, in terms of following along, I'm just trying to understand which document among these many that I should be looking at and saying, okay, here's my speedometer, and it's obviously a source document, but it feeds into the rest of these comparison documents
The
going
color
forward.
document you have feeds into the top of the spread landscape.
Right, right,
The town document feeds in the middle, the bottom being the total.
okay.
And those feed, and those are all updated with departmental meetings in the town, administrative meetings on the Board of Ed side, and then flowed into the waterfall, which then flowed into the...
All which of these comparison purposes, okay.
Yes.
Right,
Right, so if you just take this out of the equation, everything else is just current information, and then this is comparative information.
all right.
And the current information is correct, but there's obviously, as Mr. Flynn pointed out, it looks like the February 7 number wasn't updated when they did the comparative chart.
Right, so
The September information, the current information, does flow and does cross-reference.
okay, I was just trying to understand what was driving what, and, you know, the fact that our changes are represented here, I just want to make sure I follow the, you know, how the source document works its way
Right.
through. Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I'd only make, when you ask which one are we following, this does tie in checking 3 or 4 years to Mr. Mayor's document. And so in terms of the dollar amounts of what we're looking on from a planning perspective, this is what we will be using. The names of the project may change based on enrollment projections updated, security report, PCB report, and so those will get discussed by the Board of Ed and moved around as may be necessary for the benefit of the students. But that the totals, in terms of authorization year and how it impacts the cash flow, we will use this as the guidepost.
So let me ask a very simple question then, presumably. What's the dollar amount of potential Board of Education project requests in this current fiscal year? That's assumed by this.
There's 2 non-recurring requests. Mill Hill partial roof replacement and North Stratfield boilers. There's, as I said last spring when we brought these forward to you, you get a breather from us for a while on these very large projects. So all we're anticipating this year, provided the Board of Ed approves them, are those 2 projects for a total of $826,266. There won't be any long-term building committee required, you know, $10 million projects.
Okay.
And you can see the following year, we're anticipating that, you know, there's the final, I'll call the final phase of Sherman, which we had talked about 2 or 3 years ago when we did it, when the boards approved it, they knew what phase was coming. We did push that out a year here, but it didn't go off the chart, so that would be, you know, next year. So in the current fiscal year coming up, we have 2 non-recurring projects. That's it.
Why on these charts are they labeled 2014, 2015 on the top
As
left?
I go back and forth with the town on this, as we try to line them up when you're first going to expend it. It's kind of like our 14-15 budget comes to you in 13-14, right?
Mhm.
And so we start spending the money July 1. So that's how it lines up.
So it's 826, we can expect around that number to come to us this year
Correct.
for capital requests for you guys.
Right, but the expenditure on that won't start till July of 14. That's why it's in that column.
And the following year, you're proposing that it's probably going to be closer to 3.6 million, give or take.
Correct, that's the current plan, right.
How about on the town side, Mr. Mayor? Same question, over the next couple of
Sorry, I
years.
was trying to figure out which was, I think the 89 number is the correct number, but
Okay.
that's what I was doing, but I'm sorry, I didn't. follow
No
the
problem.
question.
No problem. On the town side, so we just heard from the Education Administration that basically over the next couple of years, we're going to have about $125,000 worth of projects to come before us at some point this year, and perhaps as much as 3.6. Now, I know there's going to be a long-term facilities plan, I get it, all right, but this is best available information. What about on the town side? What can we expect to come for request before us over the next couple of years?
Looking at the telephone system, about $2 million for this year. And then next year, you're looking at Valley Road Bridge, streetscape pedestrian improvements, and golf course clubhouse renovation.
Where can I find those on your schedules, if you don't mind?
That's on the, assumptions for waterfall
Yep.
schedule. The top part is the year that it's anticipated the project will be brought to the town bodies for approval, and then the bottom half is the year that it's anticipated the funds will actually be spent if they are indeed approved in the year indicated on the top half of the and one of the assumptions that goes through the model is that all non-recurring expenditures that are approved will be expended in the year of approval. So if you want to like pick a year, do you want to pick like 214-15? 15-16?
See it. Okay, so if I look at 13, 14 here,
Okay.
that's the stuff we've done already, correct? So then I look at 14, 15, right? And those are the items that'll be before us this year, correct?
Correct. Because those are the non-recurring, which is are approved in like March, April timeline. So we put them in the next year, which is the year that they'll be expended.
So what you have there is $1.8 million of non-recurring that'll be proposed, rough numbers, I'm not trying to pin you to,
Yes, sir.
right? And then you have capital requests of 8.6 million.
You got it.
So that what the current numbers before us assume is that this year we can expect to see in total projects from the town side of about 10.4 and projects from the Board of Ed side of about 800,000. So roughly $11.2 million of capital type requests that come before us, whether as non-recurring or as discrete capital projects within the next 9 to 10 months.
No, I think and Mr. Michelangelo, I think, is in the audience behind me, but it's my understanding that the Valley Road Bridge will come before the town bodies next fiscal year for approval. That's 14-15 fiscal year.
Okay, so should that be moved to another column?
No, because that's 14, it says 14-15.
I'm a little bit of who's on first. Okay.
The center column on the first page,
Yeah,
14-15.
yeah. Okay,
Uh,
but the other
yeah.
column on the page for the Board of Education is 14, 15, and they're telling me it's coming before us this year. Is that because that's non-recurring?
That's because I don't even know how to respond to that question. That's because, that when I had discussions, I've not talked directly with Mr. Title on this, but the original intent of the schedules were that the top part would be the year of approval, the bottom part of the year, but there were some internal discussions in the last minute at the Board of Ed that got changed a little bit. And it's a little bit inconsistent on the Board of Ed side.
Okay, so for 2014, 2015, let me ask it another way. Let's just say on the town side then, we've got a schedule here that says non-recurring and capital projects approval by year. We've got 2013, 2014, right?
Those, I think, were pretty much approved in March, April of last year.
Except for the phone system, right?
Except for no, you're looking at
13, 14.
13, 14. That is a correct statement.
Okay, so those are, everything else has been approved but the phone system.
Right, and it is the intent of the, at this point anyway, that phone system will be brought before the boards, the town bodies, sometime this fiscal year. We're in process of doing investigation of how much that might actually cost and figuring out how to approach that project.
Okay, let's jump to the next schedule then.
But let me, if I may.
Sure, please.
Go down to the bottom then. You notice at the bottom, expenditures for the fiscal year?
Yeah, don't confuse me. Let's stay with approval right now.
Okay, you got it.
Talk to me like I'm a second grader. All right, let's go to the second column. Let's go to the second column. So the non-recurring I get, the 1.8, that's an estimate, the 1.780 of what will come before us in March for next fiscal year.
During the budget process, yes, sir.
Get it. Okay, for capital, right?
Yes, sir.
These projects, are these going to come before us this fiscal year or next fiscal year?
Next fiscal year.
Okay, so none of this will come before us before June of next year.
That is the way the document was intended to be produced with the department heads.
Okay. So the only thing that's going to be before us in the next 9 months is going to be the phone system.
Yeah, I'm going to, like I said, intent, and since we do have Mr. Michelangelo in the room,
So we're going to have the phone system, and we're going to have $825,000 from the Board of Ed.
And $266.24.
At this point, if you can say you're not going to go over that, I'd be a happy guy.
Okay, if we're looking in the third column, one of the items, the PD fire department, second column.
Second column. Top quadrant of the page.
Okay.
Well, basically, the question I asked was, right now, based on the way I'm reading this document, I'm just trying to set the context for our board. It looks as though the only thing to come before us in this fiscal year from the town side is going to be $2.2 million on the phone system.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so nothing else.
Correct.
Yeah, I would temper that with the fact that we're in the process of looking at Penfield,
Yep.
right? And there's a number of options there. We've just agreed to set up a building committee for that. So it's very possible, on one hand, nothing will change from what we have. It's also possible another proposal may come through.
What's assumed in here for Penfield,
What was approved in January.
which
$1
was
million.
$1 million?
And again, within that, but a $500,000 net to the town within that. In the
Right.
same way, when you look at the Valley Road Bridge, a lot of that project is reimbursed
Right.
by the state or federal government, so that the total dollar amount is much higher than what we're actually costing the town in that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Other questions? My apologies, I took a fair amount of everybody's time to go through mine.
got through it.
Mr.
Maybe now we can go down to your expenditures per fiscal year.
Thank you, sir.
And, because what I'm looking at is,
You're on the
If
town
you-
side, sir?
sorry,
You're on the town side?
on the town side,
Thank you.
we'll stick with 2014-15, right? You have your non-recurring at 1,780, which matches your non-recurring on this sheet.
Right, it is, the assumptions throughout the documents are that the non-recurring will be approved in the budget period, will show up on this schedule as approved in the following year and expended in that year.
And then underneath, in this box underneath where it says expenditures per fiscal year, you have net capital projects this fiscal year for 7.35 million, right?
Yes, sir.
Which is a number you have over in your projected cash flow. So can you just tell me where that number comes from?
That number is the sum total of the money that's anticipated to be spent on Storm Sandy, $1,288,000, the Valley Road Bridge, $1,008,000, clubhouse renovation, $1,775,000, streetscape pedestrian improvements, $1 million, a fire pump, $650,000 for Station 1, Phase 1 of the phone system, $1,210,000, minus reimbursements of $372,000 that we anticipate receiving during that year from Storm Sandy expenditures, netting $7,350,000.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Brown?
I don't think so. I'm just looking at the expenditures and then on, back up to the non-recurring and capital projects by approval year. You're just basically bringing that down from one box down underneath. All those
Like for-
projects.
Yeah, the non-recurring is just brought straight down. Like, if you look at the phone system, for example, if you look in 13-14, you see the phone system is approved in 13-14. You go down to the bottom, there's no money to be spent on the phone system in 13-14. It's anticipated that'll be approved late, and then and then the early stage, the first phase spending will happen in 14-15, and the second phase spending will happen in 15-16.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Brown. Other questions, comments? Anything? Anybody have anything, Mr. Leclerc, anything? All right, from my perspective, if we could get the answers to, how much did we assume we were going to be approving in capital projects over the next number of years in February versus how much do we assume now? And then what is the assumption of our overall debt level over the next 10 years or so, and what, what that outstanding debt level is going to be? I think the 10% rule was kind of, we didn't want to go over that, but as we face, increased challenges on the budget side, managing this number down is going to be important for all of us over the next number of years.
That 10% number is something we've been over in the past.
Yep.
We've brought it down, and the initial goal
Yep.
was to get the debt service number to stop being a driver for the tax increase.
Yep.
By getting it stable as we have over the next few years, that takes the pressure off the tax rate increase. The second piece is to continue to drive that down so that we're a little bit less leveraged than that. And that's
Yep.
what,
Yeah. Yeah. Because one of the things that, before we even got on the Board of Finance a number of years ago now, was the discussion around town was that our debt level had increased so much because we had so many school building projects that needed to be undertaken in short order. And what I'd like to see is whether our debt level, now that, the school building projects have quote-unquote slowed down, right? We don't have another high school opening, those type things. We're not building another middle school. We're not building another elementary school. Is that debt level now starting to taper off not just remain flat. And, you know, I think that should be kind of the goal if we can get there.
Yeah, I think there are 1, 2, 3 trends that are working with that. One is the long-range plan for the Board of Ed,
Yep.
which is taking a couple of years hiatus here, but is still in place, and there's still a number of renovation things that we have to do there. Second, we've done very few big projects on the town side.
Yep.
Penfield kind of comes to mind. I'm not sure if we've done anything anywhere near that scope, and we do have a few things out there now that if you look at the town side facilities plan are under works. So that is going to fill in some of that gap. So it's not just, the Board of Ed may follow just the trend you said, and the town may fill in a bit of that. The second piece, as everybody's well aware, we've benefited from some extremely low interest rates over the past. Now, that doesn't affect the debt service
Exactly.
component.
Well, it
But
affects
debt-
the
debt
service,
level,
not the
sorry.
balance.
But
Right.
it will impact the debt service on the budget side.
Yep.
And you've already seen the impact of that as we started to ratchet up the estimates in the out years.
Yep.
So I think that's it. And there may be a few new things that kind of come up. You know, two things that we're in the process of looking at. One is flood mitigation work in the beach area. We're just starting to explore some of that. There's no estimates. It's not included in this. But certainly with the impact of Storm Sandy, with making projections ahead for both weather patterns and sea level rises, we're taking a long, hard look at what we can do there in terms of improving our flood mitigation in that area. At the very early stages in that, so there's no projects defined, and other than the what I'll call the Storm Sandy kind of fix-it projects that we identified. And then the other one of the other kind of areas, Mr. Michelangelo and I got some exercise 2 weeks ago and walked the length of Post Road on both sides and realized that our sidewalks are in pretty bad shape, that we installed our sidewalks in many cases 20 to 30 years ago. And as much as we've talked about our paving program, our planned maintenance and replacement for paving, if you walk through downtown and enjoy some of our fine restaurants, if you walk through Southport Center, and if you walk on any of the side streets, you'll see a lot of room for improvement in terms of our sidewalks. So our first look is looking at what grants and what funding we have in place to do that, but we need a better maintenance plan for what's taking place there.
Now that you've tipped off every personal injury attorney in the next 20-mile range.
If you walk through our downtown,
We don't need to go anymore.
there's not much of a tip you need.
All right. What
Not
else?
that I'd suggest skateboarding, but you wouldn't want to bring it on there.
Mr. Stone?
Glad you're addressing the sidewalks. But anyway, on school enrollment, you're doing a new study or new thing. How accurate have they been in the past?
Good question.
Yeah, they've been quite good. We've been very close to our numbers. I'm quite good. I mean, we've been within 1% in that range. Just to give you, the hardest thing to predict in this town is kindergarten enrollment. Once the kids are in the system, we got a pretty good track record of knowing what the ins and outs look like from there. And just as an example, this year, I reported to the board the other night that our projections for kindergarten this year were 724 students, and 715 actually were enrolled as of last week. So given the fluctuations there, I think that's good. I think school to school, we get surprises at the elementary level on kindergarten. 10 more will show up here and 10 fewer over there. But in the aggregate, we're in pretty good shape with the projections.
Thank you. Any? Mr. Brown?
Are they going to take us out for the next 10 years like they've done before? Is that the
Yes,
plan?
that's the plan. We're looking for a new 10-year projection. Yes.
Just a question, general question. How many Connecticut towns have a growing student population? Do you know by chance?
It's shrunk dramatically over the past 5 and 6 years. Most places are finding, well, enrollment had been dropping for a number of years, and no one's really seen much of an uptick, yet. So, yeah, we're in a very small minority that over the past 3 to 4 years, up to this point, we're still, we're still growing. But the enrollment has been dropping across the state.
I think just to emphasize that, the state legislature, I believe, changed the MBR ruling so that if your school population is dropping, you're not required to hit the same MBR number that you had the prior year. So that's a broad-based problem to get the state legislature to move on that.
Hasn't applied to us, though, up to now.
Does not apply to us.
Any other questions, comments? All right, before we leave for the night, just a couple of things. This, doing a forum such as this, which has gotten shorter each time, as we've kind of gotten down to what the process should be, was part of our board's original initiative a number of years ago, whether it was 5, 6, 12, whatever, no, 5 or 6 years ago, was to look more at long-term planning for the town, particularly as it came to capital projects and as we talked about before, put some things into context. One of the other items that our board has undertaken in the past several months, and I want to recognize our subcommittee of Mrs. Albin, Mrs. LeClaire, and Mr. Walsh, has been reviewing our fund balance. And as we know, our general fund balance has been a topic of discussion by the rating agencies over these past number of years, as has our internal fund balance. And Mrs. LeClaire and Mrs. Albin and Mr. Walsh are working on providing to our board kind of a target, a recommended target as to where we should go as the fund balance as a percentage of our operating budget based on what other towns are doing, what other AAA municipalities are doing, and what's going on in the general economic climate as a whole. One of the things that's come out of that is, should we be putting together a plan? So we're going to come up with this target and say, really, this is where we should be heading towards, and then we need to develop a plan on how to get there. So one of the things I'm hopeful of is that we can, once again, bring together representatives of the RTM, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the Board of Education doesn't have a specific role in this, but they should understand this, so I would invite them to the table so that they have to live within this, so that they can understand the pressures that we're dealing with and what that roadmap is to get us to a fund balance level over the next number of years. So I'm hopeful that we can hold a dialogue and a conversation like this at some point in the future once that subcommittee is reported out to our board as, again, part of improving our long-term planning. Another item we discussed a number of years ago, and we had a very, I'll say, high-level stab at maybe a 5-year financial plan. Now, because politics is involved, it does get to be sticky, because obviously a plan is a goal or it is a barometer. It is not specific. But to get to a 3 to 5 year operating plan or 3 to 5 year financial plan to understand in what direction we're heading, I think would be very beneficial, again, to provide context for the operating budget. And Mr. Mayor, I know you served on a committee a decade or so ago that reviewed
Actually, we
some of
both
this.
did.
You did as well.
Financial Planning Advisory Committee that was made up of about 20 people that
Yeah.
put together some things. And Mr. Flynn, you and I are scheduled to
Yeah.
talk tomorrow, so I think we'll have a chance to explore that in a little more detail.
Yeah, and I agree. I just want to get on the record as to, what my kind of thoughts are. And since we did a few years ago get, again, I'll say a very high-level financial plan, I think it's something that we should, revisit. The other item in terms of long-term planning, and again, Mr. Tetra and I are going to speak together tomorrow, is really what are we looking at going into this budget season? Last year was a very difficult budget year. Hopefully this year won't be as bad. But it really has to be a strategic discussion over, what the town can afford now and what are the other town bodies, going to be willing to look at in order to hit whatever that number is. And the reason I bring that up is I never think it's a good idea to do that in the course of evaluating a specific budget, because those are strategic discussions that should happen separate and prior to when you're sitting there at 11 o'clock at night reviewing, a fire department budget or a police department budget. And it was a very uncomfortable discussion last year for a lot of people at a lot of different boards because of the general economic climate. So I would encourage us to look at that. And Mr. Tetra's right. He and I are going to speak a little bit more about this tomorrow and hopefully be able to bring something back. So I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments or follow-ups to that. But I thought it was good to provide it and let everybody know that. So, anything?
Yeah, I just think I'd like to add that having sat through somewhere between 3 and 6 of these, I think we're starting to see a lot more detail come through, so a lot more support for the numbers. Certainly, we can make some improvements on the reporting, but when I look at this package versus what we've seen at any other kind of capital planning workshop until now, there's a lot more meat on the bones here to support what the numbers are going through. So I think that helps. And I want to thank Mr. Mayor and his team in Finance for the job they did in pulling all the stuff together.
Yes,
And many of these schedules are things that we haven't looked at before in supporting this, so there's been a lot of work in terms of what's the best way to present this data and help improve the discussion that we're having here.
Yeah,
I also want to thank the Board of Ed. One of the ongoing issues we'd had in prior years was how well integrated was the Board of Ed capital plan and long-range plan into these numbers, and we found in past years to be some hiccups in that, if not some outright disagreements at time. This has been a much smoother process over the last couple of years in terms of getting those numbers in here, and you can see that even the details from that tie back into the overall numbers, so that gives a higher degree of confidence in terms of the overall projections that we're making.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra. I'll echo your comments and your thanks to the town's financial team as well as the Board of Education. I also ask Mr. Dwyer and Dr. Title, I don't recall, believe it or not, whether or not our board received a formal presentation on your long-term plan, capital plan last time. I just don't remember.
When it was approved in 2011.
Yeah, 2010, 2011. I know we received it, and it was, and we received a hard copy of it, but I would definitely think that that would be something that our board would be interested in seeing after the Board of Education has had the opportunity to be comfortable with it and vet it and bring it before us. And if that's something that, in the essence of time, Mr. Tetra, we wanted to do was the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance in the spring or summer of next year, early summer, I think that'd be very worthwhile.
Yeah, once the plan is reviewed and approved,
Yeah.
put us on your agenda.
Yeah. So with that, anything else from anybody? If not, I'll take a motion from one of my board members. See Mr. Brown, do I have a second? Sure. Mr. Stone, all in favor of adjournment? All opposed, abstentions? Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Well, I'll give this to him, save part of the budget.